Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Katayasva Mahabhaga. Yataham Akhilatmani. Krishne Nivesha Nihasangam. Manastakshe Kalevaram. Read the synonyms now. Katayasva, please continue speaking. Mahabhaga, O greatly fortunate one. Yatha, as much as. Aham, I. Akhilatmani, unto the Supreme Soul. Krishna, unto Lord Sri Krishna. Nivesha, having placed. Nihasangam, being freed from material qualities. Manaha, mind. Tyakshe, may relinquish. Kalevaram, body. Translation. O greatly fortunate Sukadeva Goswami, please continue narrating Srimad Bhagavatam so that I can place my mind upon the Supreme Soul, Lord Krishna, and being completely freed from material qualities, thus relinquish this body. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. To be fully engaged in hearing the transcendental narration described in the text of Srimad Bhagavatam means to constantly associate with the Supreme Soul, Sri Krishna, and to constantly associate with the Supreme Lord, Krishna, means to be liberated from the qualities of matter. Lord Krishna is like the sun, and material contamination is like darkness. As the presence of the sun dissipates darkness, constant engagement in the association of the Lord Sri Krishna frees one from the contamination of the material qualities. Contamination by the material qualities is the cause of repeated birth and death, and liberation from material qualities is transcendence. Maharaj Parikshit was now a realized soul by this secret of liberation. Through the grace of Sukadeva Goswami, for the latter had informed the king that the highest perfection of life is to be in remembrance of Narayana at the end of life. Let me read that again. As the presence of the sun dissipates darkness, constant engagement in the association of the Lord, Sri Krishna frees one from the contamination of the material qualities. Contamination by the material qualities is the cause of repeated birth and death, and liberation from material qualities is transcendence. Maharaj Parikshit was now a realized soul by the secret of liberation through the grace of Sukadeva Goswami, for the latter had informed the king that the highest perfection of life is to be in remembrance of Narayana at the end of life. Maharaj Parikshit was destined to give up his body at the end of 7 days, and thus he decided to continue remembering the Lord by his association with the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, and thus to quit his body in full consciousness of the presence of Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Soul. Hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam performed by professional men is different from the transcendental hearing of Maharaj Parikshit, Maharaj Parikshit was a soul realized in the absolute truth, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. The fruitive materialist is not a realized soul. He wants to derive some material benefit from his so-called hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam. Undoubtedly, such an audience, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from the professional men, can derive some material benefit as they desire, but that does not mean that such a pretense of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam for a week is as good as the hearing of Maharaj Parikshit. It is the duty of the same to hear Srimad Bhagavatam from a self-realized soul and not be duped by professional men. One should continue such hearing till the end of one's life so that one can actually have the transcendental association of the Lord and thus be liberated simply by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Maharaj Parikshit had already given up all his connections with his kingdom and family, the most attractive features of materialism, but still he was conscious of his material body. He wanted to be free of such bondage, also by the constant association of the Lord. Om Ajnanatimrandasya Gnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Reading the translation again. Oh, greatly fortunate Sukadev Goswami. This is Parikshit Maharaj addressing Sukadev Goswami. He's saying, oh, greatly fortunate Sukadev Goswami, please continue narrating Srimad Bhagavatam so that I can place my mind upon the Supreme Soul, Lord Krishna, and being completely freed from material qualities, thus relinquish the body. So, welcome again, everybody. Hare Krishna. Thank you for joining us in today's discussion. It takes a lot, especially on a Sunday morning, to be up early and to take up, spiritual topics, especially. The body is crying for, a little more sleep. The stomach is crying for a little more food. The eyes are burning. And, you're snug, especially in the early hours of the morning when it is starting to get chill again. We can see that happening. Fall is in here and winter is sure to follow very soon. So in spite of all that, you being here is really, really, really appreciated. And thank you so much for your association. So the backdrop, just to get us back in the zone here and hopefully make you awake, is that in the previous chapter, it was Lord Brahma who was clearly establishing the supremacy of Lord Sri Krishna as the absolute, as the ultimate absolute truth, right? So completely captivated hearing the pastimes of the Lord and his many incarnations, Maharaj Parikshit is completely getting into it, right? He's filled with enthusiasm and he's starting to bubble with questions to know more and more and more about Krishna. And mind you, and this is only the first or maybe even the second day, in the last 7 days of his life. Okay, so this is just the beginning, and Maharaj Parikshit is just starting to introduce the topics of Krishna. So even that is so fascinating, so interesting, and it is so engaging that Maharaj Parikshit, in spite of all the circumstances that he's in, he's getting completely absorbed already. This is probably just the first or the second day, and he has a few more days left before he gives up his body, and he knows that, and it's a certainty. I mean, just try and imagine the gravity of the situation, right? With hundreds of elevated personalities sitting in the audience. Vyasadeva, Narada Muni, Lord Brahma himself, and several others. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And then you have Sukadev Goswami, who's spotlessly glorifying the Supreme Lord. I mean, the whole scene must have been electrifying and yet totally sublime. And that almost sounds like an oxymoron, right? How can something that is so electrifying can also be sublime? When we think about electrifying, normally in my younger years, I would think about a rock concert, right? Sitting in a rock concert, totally electrified with all that sound and, all of the craziness that's happening on the stage and around. And yet when we talk about, being in a sublime situation, you're thinking about a peaceful, placid scene where you're sitting maybe, in front of a lake or in front of the ocean, and you're sitting on the beach, and it is so calm and it's so peaceful. It makes you feel very, very, being in a very sublime kind of a mood. So it's hard to relate both ends of the spectrum. But here, Maharaj Parikshit is in such a situation where he is experiencing, all of this. So let's get ourselves into that situation, if we can, to try and appreciate what Maharaj Parikshit is going through. So in this chapter, in the previous chapter, it was all about Lord Brahma telling Narada and establishing, everything about the absolute truth, Sri Krishna. In this chapter, the whole chapter practically, Maharaj Parikshit is asking a barrage of questions to Sukadeva Goswami. And it may sound like a barrage, but these were not easy questions. These were all questions about the Lord, about his pastimes, about his personal being, and so on, right? I mean, that takes me back to, my days in engineering college. And I'm sure many of you on the call can also relate to that, whether it's engineering college or otherwise. Back in India, if you've been through the exams and been through your 4-year, 5-year degree, the exams were always, an enigma for most of us. Whatever we would study would be in the last 15 days before the exam, right? Because during the whole semester, it was practically a washout for all the various good reasons, or not. And so during the exam, we would always complain, right? There would be 6 questions that would show up on the question paper. And of those 6 questions, we were required to answer 4 questions. Now, that may sound simple, but then each of those questions had subparts, maybe 3 or 4 subparts. But then each of those subparts would have another 2 or 3 subparts. So it would take up the entire 3 hours of the exam, right? And the worst part was, none of the questions were in syllabus, right? They were almost always out of syllabus. And when I look back in retrospect, I always think, but some of those questions, or most of those questions, really did not reinforce our, the concepts of what we were learning actually. They were more so, trying to test our ability to, handle some of the most, I would call it irrelevant details that were more memory oriented as opposed to concept oriented, application oriented, right? So I'm sure, many of you have gone through that, and that comes to my mind. And here we are, where Maharaj Parikshit is not asking easy questions, but they are all relevant to the topics of the Lord. So Sukadeva Goswami is not being examined per se, but he's being asked these barrage of questions that are coming at him from Parikshit Maharaj, but in a way that actually exemplify and are actually creating even more enthusiasm in the speaker, in Sukadeva Goswami, to discuss and elaborate and expand on those topics of the Lord. I mean, how beautiful is that, right? You see this jugalbandi that we call in musical terms, right? When 2 players or playing the musical instruments are engaging with each other, but the intensity goes up when they start to engage with each other, and the chemistry is building up. The tempo is going up. Similarly, we're seeing this same engagement building up between Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadeva Goswami. So Parikshit Maharaj is getting so engaged by what Sukadeva Goswami is saying about and discussing about Lord Sri Krishna. And at the same time, Sukadeva Goswami is getting so excited. He's getting enthused. He's getting encouraged to speak more and more and more about the Lord. I mean, just think about it. Everything else is, not so relevant. It's the topics of the Lord that is the subject matter, which is causing this engagement and causing these two elevated personalities to engage with each other, with one another, and that's causing us to also get interested as we hear and as we read from the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's such a beautiful situation to be in. So he's not only asking these questions, but he's asking them submissively. Even though he is the king, right? He is the emperor of the world. I mean, he can demand, in a way, his tone can be very different, especially, at a time when he knows that he's going to be losing his life. It's all going to come to a crashing end in a few days. With everything that he's accomplished as the emperor of the world, he could have asked those questions very nonchalantly, right? But no, he's in a very humble mood. He's inquiring submissively. Like I said, he's getting so absorbed in the beautiful pastimes and the topics of the Lord that he is asking submissively, very humbly, he's asking these questions. And not only that, these questions are not just mundane questions. These questions are for the benefit of mankind. They're intelligent questions. So that is the beauty of how even the way Srimad Bhagavatam is bringing this to us is through the discussion of these elevated personalities and the questions that are being asked and the topics that are being responded to, to those questions. It's just amazing. So it makes me think, when you consider the pastimes of some of the elevated devotees that we were hearing through the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a striking observation, right? Motivations may be different, circumstances may be different, but one thing remains constant. Take Gajendra, for instance. He was the king of elephants, right? And yet he's in the battle of his life, or should I say, for his life, right? He's fighting away with this powerful crocodile for not just a few moments, but for 1,000 years. And as that is happening, he can feel his life air slowly dissipating, slowly going away, slowly, escaping from his body. And so what does he do? He offers glorifying prayers to Lord Vishnu, who then comes and rescues him. Dhruva Maharaj. On the other hand, Dhruva Maharaj was wanting to gain a kingdom that was greater, even greater than his great-grandfather, Lord Brahma. And what did he do? He went to the forest, even at the tender age of 5, he went to the forest by himself to, face all of the dangers there, just with that determination to gain that bigger kingdom by meditating upon the Lord. Then you take Prahlad Maharaj, different situation. He was constantly subjected to all of these worst atrocities. I mean, life-threatening. Any other person, any other human being would have been gone in a fraction of a second. What to speak of the anxiety that a person is put through every time, there are snakes being thrown at him. He's being dipped in hot oil. He's being pushed off of, mountain cliffs with weights tied to his neck. There are mad elephants that are rushing at him to crush him. And after all, he's a small boy, a tender little boy. Can you just imagine? Then you take Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma was wondering, he was the very first. He was surprised to find that, first of all, that he was the very first living entity in this material universe, right? So when he came out from the the lotus that is that sprouted from the navel of the Lord, Brahma was in total darkness around him, right? He couldn't see anything. He tried, looking around the lotus. He tried going down the stem of the lotus, and he kept going and going and going and going, and it was never ending. So he decided, this is not going anywhere. So he turned around, climbed his way all the way back up through the lotus. So finally, a long story short, Brahma was, he could hear the sound vibrations which prompted him to do tapa, right? And he meditated upon the Lord. And again, he meditated upon the Lord for not just, a few moments or a few years, but 100 celestial years, right? To really understand the purpose of his existence. And then you have Maharaj Parikshit, who has every reason to be in the utmost fear and anxiety of leaving his body in a few days, right? But what does he do instead? He gives up everything, his riches, his family, his kingdom, only to absorb himself in thinking about and discussing topics of the Lord. So through all these examples, like I said, regardless of the motivation, regardless of the circumstance, one striking thing that stands out is that each of these elevated devotees remembered Krishna. And mind you, Maharaj Parikshit is no ordinary person. He's coming from the lineage of Lord Sri Krishna. And think about it. He was protected as a fetus in the womb of his mother Uttara, right? By Krishna himself. Yet this time around, Parikshit Maharaj his focus is entirely on the Supreme Lord. He's not really thinking about, oh, I'm losing my life, I should be calling on Krishna to help me out of this situation. Instead, he wants to know more about Krishna so that he can leave this body peacefully. So he understands that, he needs to be completely surrendered, which he is. He's completely surrendered. And that complete surrender and dependence on Krishna gives him that protection, or gave him that protection, not only in life, but also in death. And that is a very profound realization. We always think, oh, we're in a terrible situation. Krishna, please help me. Krishna, please help me. Get me out of this situation. Even if you remember Krishna, right? Those are the kinds of prayers that go out. Like a text that I remember when I was a little child reading, the prayers came out of this, this little person that was in total anxiety, like frightened birds. The expression given was like prayers coming out of the mouth like frightened birds. And that's practically how we're pleading, we're, reaching out to Krishna when, as devotees, when we're going through very stressful situations. But that's in life. Here, Parikshit Maharaj is in complete dependence. He knows he's completely surrendered to the Lord. And he knows that Krishna's protection is there, not only in this life, but also in death. So it's a very profound realization as well, that is being explained to us. So if you're serious about the extreme value of life, remember Krishna, especially at the time of death, right? And Krishna himself gives us this instruction. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajyatante kalevaram. Yeah? In that verse, Krishna is saying, hey, you should remember me, because whatever you were thinking of at the time of death is what you're going to be getting. So if you're thinking of me, you will never come back into this material world again. You will come and be with me and spend time with me, right? And that's a very helpful instruction for all of us. So Maharaj Parikshit set the perfect example by doing just that. He abdicated his kingdom, his riches, even his family, to focus entirely on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You know, just a few days ago, I was in the doctor's office for a routine checkup. I was sitting in the waiting room, and as I was waiting for the doctor to call me in, my eyes went towards the entry door, and I saw, something on wheels coming in to the room, into the waiting hall, into the office. And it was a walker. And holding that walker, coming in slowly, was an old woman who was, struggling to walk, but she was, holding on to her dear life, by holding on to that walker. And she made her way in. And she made her way in successfully. And, maybe about 10, 15 seconds later, perhaps, I see another walker making its way in. So I was thinking to myself, this must be another person, coming in. And sure enough, there was a man who also was on a walker. And both of them somehow gravitated and, seated themselves right next to me. It was only, through the conversation, because the woman was pretty loud, that I quickly realized that they were husband and wife. And here's how. She started off by saying, "Oh, you really don't know how to arrange your bag in this walker. See the way I've done it." And so she went on about it for a few minutes, trying to explain to him, here's how you arrange your things, here's how you organize your bag, and here's how you put the bag in the walker, and here's how it makes it easier for you to do things, with the walker, and so on. The old man listened and listened and listened, and I knew, definitely husband and wife here. And then there was silence for a few minutes. Then after about 5 to 10 minutes, I think, the lady started again. She said, "Oh, you went all over the place. It took us so long to get to the doctor's office." And then she went on and on and on and on and on and on about it for the next almost 10 minutes, I think. I mean, it felt like forever. And she was so loud. And I was sitting right next to the couple here. So the man just listened and listened. He had this look on his face, and then and then there was silence again. So I thought, okay, it's done. And I was waiting for my doctor. I was looking at my watch. I said, okay, it must be time now. I should be called any minute here. And then the lady started all over again. And then she went on and on and on and on and on again, complaining about how long it took for this man to drive. And she thought he was going all over the place, taking all the wrong directions before getting to the doctor's office. So finally, the man spoke up, and he looked at her and he said, "Oh, what? But I got you to the doctor's office. That's all that matters." So I, I was literally holding myself from, laughing. I was like, oh man, okay. Finally, the patients gave way. And yeah, in all totality, he finally brought her into the doctor's office in time. I mean, but the lady was complaining and complaining and complaining. And I was thinking to myself, this realization hit me. It was like, you know, these both husband and wife, they've been together for many, many, many years, most likely. They're at a stage where they have to depend on other things and other people. They were visibly very, very, very old. And they were here at the doctor's office as well. So I was just thinking to myself, technically speaking, none of us know when, we're going to be leaving our material bodies, right? We don't know when it's going to happen. And we don't have to get to that ripe old age. Nowadays, it can happen anytime. I've lost some of my younger friends, my younger colleagues at work, at school, and all of that. So it's happening around us, and it can happen to any of us at any given point in time. But yet, what was striking to me was that this couple was still, discussing things that were so mundane in one sense, right? complaining about certain things in life that we shouldn't be really giving all this attention to, but yet it's consuming us. It's completely consuming us. We're so attached to our ways that we don't even realize when that final moment for us will arrive. So our acharyas always say, remember Krishna, right? Never forget Krishna. Savai manaha Krishna padara vendayo, right? But however, remembering Krishna is easier said than done. So again, Krishna instructs Arjuna and to all of us to endeavor and practice that endeavor to remember him. Right? In the Bhagavad Gita, he says in chapter 8, he says, Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanyagamina paramam purusham divyam yati partanu chintayan. He says, you should endeavor, you should practice Abhyasa yoga in remembering me. Because if you do that in an undeviated manner, without any interruptions, and you're constantly remembering me, devoted to me, you will certainly come to me. You will surely come to me. Right? So through proper hearing, one can easily remember, because we as we chant the holy name with attention and purity, the Lord is within our hearts. Because through that sound vibration, through the ears, it enters our heart. And when that happens, the Lord himself is present in our hearts. And how do we know that? Because clearly the scriptures tell us that there is no difference between the Lord's name, his form, his pastimes. They're all non-different. And one thing that comes to my mind is, Srila Prabhupada once said that just like we are thinking that the moon is coming along with us as we're walking, similarly, Krishna is with us as we chant and hear about him. I mean, that is such a wonderful expression. So it kind of resonated in me, and it stuck with me. Yeah, that's just true, right? Even as a child, we're always driving in the car or walking with outside, you would see the moon, and you feel like the moon is constantly coming with you, no matter where you're going, which way you're going, up or down, this left or right, you feel like the moon is coming along with you. And Prabhupada's, likening that to, Krishna. As long as we're chanting and we're hearing, Krishna is with us. So it's like Krishna is coming along with us. So as we chant constantly, the Lord appears in our hearts. He does. He's there. He's there. It's just that we're not able to perceive. Unfortunately, with these material senses, we're not able to perceive. We need to reach that level of purity before we can. But he is. Krishna is there. The moment we chant, Krishna is there. And guess what? He's in our hearts, and he says, uh-oh, this place needs fixing. But if my devotee needs me, and if my devotee wants me, I will come. But since I'm here, I will also help cleaning up this messy situation that this devotee is going through. So this is another way of saying that the more we chant, the more and more the darkness and the dust and the dirt from our heart is removed. Cheto Darpana Marjanam. In fact, no one can say it better than Srila Prabhupada in this purport that we're reading. And let me read it again, where he says, contamination by the material qualities is the cause of repeated birth and death. Contamination by the material qualities is the cause of repeated birth and death. And liberation from material qualities is transcendence. In other words, first, the cause for our repeated birth and death, and Srila Prabhupada does not mince his words ever, right? No sugarcoating here. He goes straight to it, and he says the cause for our repeated birth and death is due to our attachment to everything that's material. And second, we need to transcend if we are to break this cycle of repeated birth and death. And not just repeated birth and death, but everything in between, because as we're living our life, we're also creating more and more and more karma through our activities, right? Which is again kind of predetermining what our next life is going to be like. So remember, even though the material energy, the material energy is also an energy of the Lord, it is still his external energy. It's inferior energy. It's illusory energy, right? And it's constantly consuming us, just like a moth that's attracted to the flickering flame. But Maharaj Parikshit, in this situation, exemplary, right? In his behavior, in his actual demonstration of what it means to be situated in transcendence. Because transcendence, by definition, as Prabhupada is putting it, is getting away, releasing ourselves from these material activities. And how is that happening? Through the association of devotees of the Lord and being completely absorbed in topics of the Supreme Personality, Sri Krishna. So, and when that happens, and when you're in that platform of transcendence, Krishna says, again in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, Janma karma chame devyam evam yo vetti tattvataha tatya deham punarjanma naiti mameti so arjuna. So beautiful. He says, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not return to this material world again. He does not take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna, he says that. So for us, this very same principle applies. And this is the solution to our miserable lives, an unflinching attachment to the temporary. Right? We have this shelter and that shelter, this anxiety, that anxiety. We're constantly attached to this material surrounding that we're in. Now, we may not be sitting on the banks of the Ganges, but we can still continue to stay in the association of devotees, serving them and engaging in devotional service. Thereby, we always remember Krishna. Now, Srila Prabhupada says in his purport, and I've mentioned this before as well, and I'd like to read that to you again, just because it's it's definitely relevant to what we're discussing here. In the purport to Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 1, Chapter 5, Text 17, he says, even a fraction of the duration of life, let me read it again, even a fraction of the duration of life wasted cannot be compensated by any amount of gold. Human life is simply awarded to a living entity, Jiva, so that he can realize his spiritual identity and his permanent source of happiness. A living entity, especially the human being, is seeking happiness because happiness is the natural situation of the living entity. But he is vainly seeking happiness in the material atmosphere. So this, he goes on to say, this realization for a moment in the association of pure devotees like Sukadev Goswami prepares one's complete life for eternity. And thus, the sun fails to rob the pure devotee of his duration of life, inasmuch as he's constantly busy in the devotional service of the Lord, purifying his existence, right? So when it's your birthday, one thing that almost certainly happens is getting a birthday wish. I can speak for myself, from my spiritual master, where he says, happy birthday, Sri Vallabha. You have my blessings, but you're getting one day closer to Krishna. Right? So it's really not one day closer to death, but one day closer to Krishna. So Maharaj Parikshit was not anxiously calling out for help from all of these esteemed sages to protect him, or even looked to Krishna for that matter, because Krishna has saved his life, when he was when he was in the womb of his mother. As the emperor of the world, just think about it, as the emperor of the world, he could summon his vast armies of soldiers to come and protect him. They could practically have created a shield around him. Think about it. Possible, right? But no, instead, he assembled an army of sages. So it wasn't an army of soldiers, but an army of sages, right? So instead, he deeply resented what he had done, and he completely absorbed himself in hearing about the Lord. So this was a notable feature, and as a true leader, Maharaj Parikshit did not succumb to the mistake he had made, and again that was yogamaya, and that was a pastime, and he did not die in anxiety. Instead, he set an example for all mankind by taking the shelter of the Supreme Lord. And how did he do that? Again, by hearing the topics of the Lord in the association of pure devotees. Now, we all don't get advance notice of when we're going to leave this material body. We spoke about that, we know that. So it is even more important that we hear the wonderful pastimes of the Lord, and by constant hearing, we even this dry heart of ours starts to become wet with the attraction for the Lord. And when that attraction for the Lord starts and grows and sustains, and that's when Prabhupada says our devotional life has begun. And that again is a very profound statement. That's something that resonates with me as well, and I'd like to just repeat that. So he says, as this heart of ours is constantly saturated by hearing about the Lord, his pastimes, and his absolute supremacy, and his care and compassion and love for all of us, when that attraction starts to germinate in our hearts, is when our devotional life actually begins. So think about it. Anyone can chant, or anything can chant. It could be a tape recorder, it could be a parrot. But I don't think you're going to find devotion in a tape recorder. But as we chant, it may feel a little unnatural initially. It may feel, hey, I've got other things to take care of. There could be other anxieties hitting us. But as we keep chanting again and again and again constantly, through good situations and bad situations, that attraction for Krishna is bound to happen. And when that happens, our devotional life begins. That's when our devotional life actually begins. And this is greatly exemplified by Maharaj Parikshit. He is also exhibiting and demonstrating his eagerness to hear Krishna. So that means he has a taste for the holy name. He has a taste for hearing about the pastimes of Krishna. So in totality, Krishna says, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mam evaisyasi yuktvaevam atmanam matparayan. Right? He says, engage your mind in thinking about me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me, and worship me. And being completely absorbed in me, surely, he says, surely you will come to me. He didn't say you may, right? He said you will come to me. So in summary, I know I've spoken for several minutes here. In summary, these are the important takeaways for us. Maharaj Parikshit, first of all, is completely fired up. He's so engaged in hearing about the Lord from the lips of a pure devotee like Sukadeva Goswami. He's bubbling with questions to learn, not just because he wants to get some airtime, but to hear more and more and more about the Lord. He wants to, and he's doing that with a mood of submission, complete surrender. So he's inquiring submissively. We also see that Maharaj Parikshit, he has only a few days left in his life. And it's going to be a horrible death. I mean, it's not like a peaceful, passing away in your sleep. It's a snake bird. You've never even seen or heard of a snake bird. What to speak of, the snake bird coming and biting you, and, your life is going to go. But here, he is completely fearless. He's completely fearless, and he's surrendered to the Lord. He feels the shelter of the Lord. He actually feels the shelter of the Lord. And in that shelter is the protection of the Lord. So remembrance of the Lord is the secret sauce. Okay, so that's the most important takeaway for me, and I'm hoping for you as well. I'd be happy to hear if you feel otherwise, but remembrance of the Lord is the secret sauce. As long as we remember the Lord, and we remember the Lord constantly, we can start to feel his shelter, and in his shelter is everything. All the protection that we need against all the anxieties, against all the material desires that we have, against all our, incapacities and inadequacies that we may have. That protection of the Lord is there. And therefore, it reinforces the importance of human life, because this is only possible when we are in this material, in this human body. And who knows where we're going to be in our next life. We've already gone through millions of lifetimes and we're still here. We're fortunate that we are in this human body. So let's look at the brighter side of things and say, hey, we're in this human body, and not just that, of all the millions of people around the world and in the universe. Just a handful, just a few, a very, very, very insignificant percent actually is questioning why, what is the purpose of life? And of those, there's an even smaller percentage of people who's saying, who is the Lord? Why am I coming? What is the purpose? And how is the Lord helping me, get back to where my constitutional position is? And even fewer are doing something about it, not just thinking and speculating and, pondering as to what this life is all about and why am I an individual soul, blah, 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 but actually doing something about it and engaging in devotional life. So we should feel extremely, extremely grateful that, we are in this form of life, and that we, thanks to Srila Prabhupada and all our preceptors and all the scriptures in Srimad Bhagavatam, that we even have this knowledge that, we are this individual soul. This is the purpose of our life. And to gain perfection of our life means to really engage in devotional service and recognize that the Lord is the supreme absolute truth. So with that, I'd like to, bring at least my monologue to an end for now. There are a few minutes. If anyone has any comments, questions, please feel free. Let's have some discussion.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
Vinod,
Krishna.
do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Prabhu.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Prabhu, for a nice class. So, I was pondering, I think, when you were in the beginning of the class, of course, throughout the class, the way Maharaj Parikshit, right? So somehow it struck to me. He was a great personality. Krishna helped him when he was in the womb of his mother, right? Now he's in this situation. Right, he's in the situation, and then he was cursed by a small Brahmana boy, right? He's taking that and then trying to ask Sukadeva Goswami to remember the Lord, right? It was, to help him to remember the Lord, or to glorify the Lord, so that he will be able to remember more and more. So it is very touching. I don't know what is the right word, but it's very, very thing, because he's such a great personality. Throughout his life, he remembered the Lord, right? Again, he is asking at the end of his life, Sukadeva Goswami to continue to glorify the Lord. And also he said it's actually second day, right? It's not that he's seventh day and he still want. Of course, his second day is just started actually. See, please glorify more. right? So I mean, he just quoted, I mean, a few things, right? Just started in second canto only, right? What Sukadeva Goswami started speaking from Maharaj Parikshit perspective. But then, yeah, it's very, very thing. And then also the example that you gave, I mean, the practical thing that you have seen in the doctor's office. I mean, people, I mean, I mean, at least myself, right? I mean, think about a lot of small petty things. So I mean, but when we see these life threatening, or the people who are at the end of the life, right? I mean, of course, we are also at the end of the life. We don't know when it is going to come.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, from the what do you call, the time perspective, right? Generally, in general statistics perspective. So it's very hard for us to imagine. And then um, it is hard for a person to remember. I was just remembering there is some incident is happening in our family as well. So it is very hard for the person to go through it, what it is, right at the end of the life is going to come very close, right? That is going to come very close. So but I mean, we are I mean, Parikshit Maharaj was such a I mean, learned personality. I mean, he was a devotee, of course. So that is the reason he was having that kind of what do you call, inquisitiveness to understand more and more about Krishna, right? Just to hear about Krishna. I mean, I'm just thinking, with that practice, with not worrying about so many small petty things in our day-to-day life. So if we focus more, maybe the Lord will help us to remember him, right? It's not going to be possible by our own means at the end of the life. I mean, having, I mean, the facility that he got, Sukadeva Goswami came in front of him to glorify the Supreme Lord. So I mean, it is all the arrangement of the Lord, right? Of course, I mean, one way, but still Sukadeva Goswami, I mean, Parikshit Maharaj also put his effort. It is not that the Lord is just doing on his side, but yeah, Parikshit Maharaj also put his effort. So I was just pondering, Prabhu, all those points. So I was just trying to connect these things from the I mean, class that you gave. So it's very nice. So
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. In fact, what comes to my mind, and both Ruchir and I are also going through a similar situation. We have a small group of college friends. I've been very, very close, through engineering college. And in fact, one person has even been with Ruchira since she was in kindergarten.
mm,
And suddenly she was diagnosed with cancer. And so Ruchira and I have been, giving her a lot of strength, speaking about Krishna and the power of prayer. And, she's also taken to a lot of, to prayer even more deeply. But then she's also honest with us. I mean, between friends, we don't have to put up a front, right? And she's constantly telling us, I'm trying, I'm trying to pray, but the mind is constantly in anxiety.
mm,
But anxiety that hits you, especially, I mean, when we're hearing about someone close going through a situation like that itself is an anxiety. You're constantly praying, you're constantly asking the Lord, please help. Think about the person who's going through it.
yes.
So much anxiety, so much anxiety. And like I said, Maharaj Parikshit, he could have surrounded himself by, an army of soldiers to protect himself, with something like a snake bird to come. But then, no, he surrounded himself with an army of sages, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that just is so, and even during this moment of finality, that he was just going to be dying in a few days. I mean, the anxiety would have been crazy. And what to speak about no sleep, no food. I mean, he's just constantly engaged, he's so absorbed. But that's also the attraction of, when it's coming from a pure soul like Sukadev Goswami, the Lord's pastimes become so much more exemplified, so much more attractive, that it is beyond compare when it comes to anything that's material. That's my understanding. Obviously, I haven't realized it, but that's what it has to be. If it can even overcome thoughts of your own death, removing all anxiety. There was no anxiety. Absolutely. Think about the question he's asking. Maharaj Parikshit, if you go through this chapter, he's asking some very deep questions. Any other person would have said, thank you. I've spent a day I'm done. I'm walking out of here. And especially when you have Lord Brahma there, you have Vyasadeva, you have all of these fantastic personalities sitting there in the audience. So think about that, which means that Parikshit Maharaj was completely absorbed. He was completely fearless about his own death. But that's also, like you said, because Krishna is providing that through the medium of Sukadeva Goswami. And that attraction has to come. For all of us, we need to strive for that attraction. We can always be in material abject, all the time being consumed by the material energy. It's, quite normal. But the interesting part is that if we can step aside just for a moment and think, hey, this material energy is consuming me. Can I spend even a fraction of that time thinking about Krishna in whatever way that resonates with us? It could be through chanting. It could be through making bhoga, cooking for your deities. It could be for having the association of the devotees, just whatever resonates with you to help you get closer and closer to Krishna. Engage in that. Invest in that. Just by doing that, we can slowly but surely start chipping away, taking away those layers of dirt and dust slowly, even if it is a tiny nano meter of dirt, for instance, it brings us closer to Krishna, and that's what it does over a period of time. And when you look back, just see, you're 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Imagine our, spiritual master 30, 40, 50 years into the practice of Krishna consciousness. How much, when they look back where they were and where they are now today, where we were and where we are today, that itself we see, significant difference. And if that can happen to us, what to speak of, our preceptors who've been completely absorbed in the topics of the Lord. So that attraction for the Lord has to happen. And when that happens, and that calling, and again, it is mercy that we need to beg for. It's not just going to happen simply like that. That mercy has to come from Krishna. But Krishna is saying, Abhyasa Yoga, continue to practice. So that's a takeaway for myself. I'm going to continue to do, no matter what day or night and how I'm feeling or what's hitting me from all sides. Just take that small amount of time, even if it is a small amount of time, to engage and think about the Lord.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Prabhu.
You were talking about, chanting makes us fearless. And also you're talking about the anxiety and people, should chant and be fearful, right? Sorry, fearless.
Yes.
So I was thinking about this, whether chanting makes you fearless or the knowledge. If you hear more and more Bhagavatam, and when you get to spiritual knowledge, we feel that all these material things are very small, right? So that makes you fearless. Or, if I don't study and if I keep chanting, right? I'm thinking how can chanting make you fearless? Or is there something, realization comes and then because of that, you become fearless? I feel that, the knowledge you get from reading Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita, that makes you fearless. Do you want to throw some light on this, Prabhu?
Sure, Prabhu. One example that comes to my mind, you cook maybe once in a while. Again, it depends. But then
Yes,
I'm just taking the example of you're trying to make something, right? To make something, you need to have some ingredients. You need to have some vegetables, you need to have some powders, some masala, some salts, and all those ingredients that need to go into that, right? If you don't have those, are you going to be able to make anything at all? You're not going to be able to make, right? You're thinking you want to make some pulao, but if you don't have the right ingredients, you're not going to be able to make that pulao, right? It can sit in your mind. It can you can have a conjecture in your mind in terms of that pulao and the steam coming out of it, but you still are not really. It's not tangible. So what I'm getting to is that knowledge is very important, but it is not going to give you what you need to actually become fearless. The important ingredient that takes you from the platform of knowledge to the platform of fearlessness is bhakti. Bhakti has to come, devotion has to come in. And that's what we're saying. That's what we're seeing in Parikshit Maharaj. Why is he so successful in being able to conquer this whole paradox of fearlessness at the time of death? Because of bhakti. That comes from the heart. It's not from the mind. Anxieties are sitting in the mind. And we are constantly driven by our mind. Instead, we need to focus on developing that bhakti, that devotion that is happening in our heart. So this entire, these chapters are really about how do we soften and open these steel-framed hearts of ours. The canto that we're reading, second canto especially, the transformation of the heart, is one of the chapters, right? It's talking specifically about that. That's because we're constantly, Vyasadeva is brilliant. He recognizes that human beings, we're constantly driven by our minds. And the mind is constantly engaged in the sense objects. And the sense objects are available so freely in this material world. That's the whole medium of the material energy. That's how Maya engages with us. She uses all these material objects. I ended up spending so much time just trying to, get myself an iPhone 14, I guess, right? That's just come out. Why? In those days, we never had any such thing as a mobile device. But today, we're not able to live without it. It's become a necessity. That's because we're constantly using the mind to engage with these material sense objects, good or bad. We could use it for all the good reasons. Okay, I'm not saying that it's all bad, but you should and we should use it for the right reasons. But I'm saying Maya is using these sense objects to engage with us and pull us in. And that's because we're using our minds. But if we're not using, instead of using our minds, use to rechannel what we're using through the capacity of our mind, but in developing that bhakti in our heart, and let this take prominence, then all of a sudden, this knowledge that we're gaining from all the various good sources is actually going to help us propel ourselves. It's going to give you that wind beneath your wings, as we speak, right? To take you up, elevate you, and help you transcend. And Prabhupada very clearly said, transcending means getting yourself away from this material situation, getting your mind and your heart completely fixed in thinking and remembering Krishna. So that's what knowledge is absolutely essential. Without knowledge, you're not going to get there for the most part, for many, maybe 99% of us. Because without that knowledge, we're not going to know who Krishna is and what our relationship with Krishna should be, to be even able to visualize what the benefits of engaging with Krishna are. So, and that knowledge will then help us build this bhakti. And once we have that devotion, hey, you're in cruise control. That bhakti is only going to grow and grow and grow, like we see with Parikshit Maharaj, even on day 1 or day 2 of his, final 7 days. I hope that helps, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. So, according to you, bhakti makes you fearless, right,
Yes.
Prabhu?
Yes.
And you get bhakti by chanting or by
Yes.
hearing?
Yes, the devotional processes are the ones that promote bhakti. If Prahlad Maharaj was fearless at that age, what to speak at our age, at that age, that tender age of 5 or 6, it was purely bhakti, it was devotion. It was the bhakti that was completely instilled in his heart by Narada Muni while he was in the womb of his mother. That came to fruition, that helped him through the most excruciating, life-threatening situations that his own father put him through. Can you imagine? So the bhakti and devotional service. And in fact, he even says, I forget the exact verse, but Prahlad Maharaj actually quotes that. He says, Adanta, I forget the entire text there, but he actually says that fearlessness is happening only because of bhakti. And through bhakti can feel the protection, the shelter of the Lord. That's what it is. We need to start feeling the shelter of the Lord, Prabhu. And that cannot be done academically. It cannot be done by just knowledge, and even less through speculation, but it has to happen only through devotion. When you have that devotion in your heart, when we have that, then you can feel. See, even if we get glimpses, right? It may not even be constant for us at this point in our stage in our devotional life. But even that momentary experience that we have of being in that total, you're offering arati to the Lord, or you're doing something, engaging with the Lord, but for that fraction of a moment, you feel that sense, that sensation that you cannot even explain, right? That comes straight from your heart. It's not coming from your mind. Immediately you feel like tears are coming to you, your eyes swell up. Something happens bodily, but you feel that. And when you feel that, that is that tinge of devotion. And that tinge of devotion, as it sustains, as it grows, like for Rupa Goswami, and I'm sure, that would have been maybe a constant expression throughout. For us, it's just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second. When that happens, then you start to feel the shelter. When you feel that shelter of the Lord is when you have all the protection. Then all anxieties are gone. All anxieties are gone. It's a long ways, but, that knowledge is what is important. But that knowledge by itself is not going to do anything.
Right, Prabhu. But I was thinking about chant and be happy, right? So actually it says Shavanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. So Kirtanam meaning chanting. Chanting comes second. First one is hearing, right, Prabhu?
Correct.
So by hearing you get bhakti, right?
Yeah.
So why not, hear and be happy?
Yeah, but what are you hearing? Even when you're chanting is the simplest thing. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called the 2-year-old niece of Srivas. And what did he say? He said, can you repeat? And say, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Even a 2-year-old is able to recite that. It's the simplest, but yet it's the most effective. That chanting, when it is done from the heart, you're letting those sound vibrations get through your ears. That's hearing, right? That's proper hearing, actual hearing. You're not just listening to that sound, but you're actually hearing that sound and letting that sound vibration travel all the way, not to your head, but to your heart. That's when it takes effect. It's like, I'm not just watering, like, the common analogy that's given is, don't water the leaves, don't water the branches, don't water the trunk, but instead water the roots. So that's what we need. Through that hearing, we're actually watering our heart, making it a softer place, so that hearing, and like Krishna says in his very confidential, Chaturshloki verses in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayantite. Bhajatam, through that devotional activities that you are performing, whether it is hearing, chanting, all of these various devotional activities, I give you that knowledge by which you can come to me. So, you see the connection between knowledge and bhakti. Krishna himself is saying that very, very clearly.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Dandavat Pranam.
Dandavat Pranam, Shri Balaram Prasad Prabhu ki jai.
This acts of my humble obeisances, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today I woke up, you know how I woke up, Prabhu? There was a code blue emergency, and then someone was in the ventilator. That was my vision this morning. I just woke up like that. And I saw somebody was in, some person is going to die. I don't know who is that person. I have no idea. But they were putting him on a ventilator, and then I just woke up. And I don't know why it came to my mind. Now that whole class is talking about what you gave. It is teaching me a lesson. What to do at the time of code blue. We can't do anything much other than shelter of Krishna. That has to be, but cannot be happening at the time of code blue, but it has to be important to have that preparation from now, because we don't know when that code blue comes to all of us. That's one thought. And my realization with your class, such a beautiful class, and also good discussion. I had a few thoughts I'll share. That Prabhu's question was the chanting. So the clear words, crystal clear words of Srimad Bhagavatam is Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayati Ashu Vairagyam. That the moment you do the devotional service, knowledge and detachment comes in automatically. That means we are thinking that if you hear only Srimad Bhagavatam Bhagavad Gita, you'll get knowledge. Not really. Yes, it is. But when you even chant, that is also devotional service. Now you are hearing Krishna, Hare Krishna means actually it's going through the ears to the heart. That means Krishna. Glorification of Bhagavatam is also Krishna. So end of the day, we are hearing the Krishna Katha or name of Krishna, the holy name, which is not different from Krishna, which is the is supposed to be clearing our heart. So when that comes in, knowledge and renunciation, detachment comes in. So that's the verse which is we just discussed. And now another realization for me is nobody knows when their last breath comes, but I am actually, whether it's devotee or non-devotee, doesn't matter. We are actually attracted to immediate happiness. We are not thinking about the bliss. Okay, because we who knows what's going to happen. That's why people say enjoy your life as long as you're who cares what happens, right? That same mentality has continued whether a devotee or a non-devotee. So even though we know all this with so much knowledge, Srimad Bhagavatam reminder, everyday hearing, yes, we know, but still any sense object comes in, the eyes goes directly to that sense object, because we need that immediate happiness. I don't know how to get rid of that. So if you can please help me, that'll be great. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful realizations. You're not alone. We're all in it together. And the good part is we're all in it together, because then we can rely on each other. So, chanting individually is one thing which is really, really good, especially if you can do it in an environment where you're not subjecting yourself to 10,000 people, doing different things around you. You're not sitting in a situation or an environment where it's not conducive to chanting. So find the time and place to really get yourself out from those kinds of situations, so that you can actually chant and mean your chanting. When I say mean your chanting, meaning that you're crying out to Krishna, please help, please help. But you want to do it in a way that you actually mean it. And that will happen only when you are focused, right? For anybody to do something, meaningfully, willfully, meaningfully, thoughtfully, you need to really focus on that, like we're discussing now. If we don't have that discussion, if we don't have that time and the place that we're setting aside to do something as meaningful and as effective as chanting potentially, then we're not going to see the effects. We can chant all day long. It's not going to happen. Our mind is still going to, and I think it was Jayapatak Maharaj only, His Holiness Jayapatak Maharaj, your spiritual master, also said once that while you're chanting is when all these various things come to your mind. Oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. And all your attachments, basically it's your attachments playing out. And his prayer constantly is, Maya, please leave me alone, at least for these few minutes. After that, I will attend to you. But at least for these few minutes, stay away from my mind. Let me be at peace. Let me chant peacefully and thoughtfully and with focus. So it's a humble prayer, but it's a very effective prayer. And I think we should continue to pray. And every time that mind is traveling in different directions at different speeds, recognize that. The first step is to even recognize that our minds are traveling. A lot of times we fall asleep. In fact, it's like driving with your eyes wide open, but you're actually asleep. It's super dangerous, right? But we don't even realize, because the eyes are open, the body is saying, yeah, my eyes are open. And you think you're seeing the road, but no, you're not. You're only seeing it through your mind's eye, which is your imagination and the dream-like situation that you're in. But you're driving the car, right? And it's a very dangerous situation for you and the passengers. So to even recognize that, hey, I'm falling asleep with my eyes wide open, that in itself is the very first step that we need to do. So to practically speaking, for what you just asked, that would be the first thing. First, let's catch ourselves, truthfully introspect and say, hey, I'm actually not concentrating. I'm losing focus. Step 2 would be, why am I chanting? That should come straight to our minds, because our minds tend to do a lot of accepting and rejecting, right? They're all the time trying to say, hey, this is more important, that is more important, this is more important, right? We're constantly trying to weigh things out in our minds analytically, to a point that we're not really focusing on what we're trying to do here, right? So even when we're chanting, we're thinking, oh, no, I got to go and finish. I got to take my, fill gas in my car, or I have to finish off that paperwork for my tax returns, whatever it is. Unless, and His Holiness Ramapada Swami Guru Maharaj would say that unless there's an actual fire in your house, try to keep yourself in that situation where you're thinking about the Lord. If you're chanting, you're chanting. If you're cooking, you're cooking. Doing what you're doing, the devotional activities that you're performing. Stay in that. So that is the second step. Second step is ensuring that we realize the importance of chanting. Why are we chanting? If that importance is not sitting in our minds, because the heart knows it, the mind doesn't. So the mind is still saying, no, you've got to go do other things. Go do other things. You can come back to your chanting later. No. Instead, you're saying, no, this is my time. I'm chanting. This is my time with Krishna. And when I'm chanting, Krishna is with me. And when Krishna is with me, I'm not going to ignore him. That is highly disrespectful for me to ignore Krishna. So if you can get that importance of chanting, that's step 2. Then step 3 will be then to focus. And Prabhupada says, okay, if you go first round, your second round, your third round, they've gone through just like the wind. It's okay. Don't beat yourself on it, but rather focus on your fourth round. Focus on your present round or your next round and say, hey, at least this round, let me do it right. That will slowly bring us. And notice there is always like a curve, right? The initial rounds are a little, may not be as enthusiastic, but then as you get into it, the more and more you chant, you're getting to a point where you really start engaging, you get into that. But then the stupid mind then comes in and interferes and says, hey, by the way, you're doing too much of this. Let's start focusing on what we need to do for the day, right? All the to-dos come in. Or if the to-dos don't come in, the honey-do list comes from the spouse. You got to get this done. You got to get those groceries, blah, blah, blah. So all these things start working towards, on your mind, right? The external influence. So that's when your chanting again starts to dip down. There again, you need to go back through this process. So this is a cyclical thing. And Prabhu, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Please forgive me. But these are the simple steps that we can take to ensure that we're chanting, with the right consciousness.
Thank you, Prabhu. It's we have our own realizations, but that's why we exchange our thoughts and get better. We always think that I know. So that's not right? So that's why we ask a question.
Absolutely, Prabhu. And through the association devotees and with such wonderful questions, we are starting to think a little more deeply, and not just at the surface, but a little more deeply, so that we can then exchange our realizations, our thoughts, and what works for one may not work for the other, but at least we should work from the general principle. The principle is very important. Application may be different, but the principle is very important. Yes, focus on the principle.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru and Gauranga. I know it's already too late, but I just couldn't resist. So, Prabhuji, as usual, wonderful, talk and such wonderful, discussion after that, talking on the spiritual subjects, studying it deeper and deeper. when you started your class today, you were giving so much comfort by saying, oh, that is how the mind is. I need more rest. I need, I don't want to get up from my bed. And I was feeling elated. And then you started talking about the exams and took us right back. And butterflies were churning in my stomach as if I was going to take an exam. I can't forget that feeling. And then what that did was it woke me up to the entire discussion, so I was able to attentively listen. So thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, that was always an enigma for all of us. And even after you finish the exam and you think you've done really, really well, when the results come, the marks don't reflect that at all. Or I've been in situations when I've done horribly and I've come out thinking, I'm telling Ruchira, because she and I were classmates. We would come out and she would say, I did this, and by the way, how did you answer that? And I would say, I did this. And then I would be thinking, oh my God, I did terribly on my exam. And then when the marks would come out, the results would come out, it would be complete opposite, right? And I was like, so there's no predictability in terms of the questions being asked and how, those examinations were carried out. Seriously, I'm even surprised that, we graduated as engineers and we're here in the US with master's degrees and so on.
In a way, bhakti is like that. You're right, because we don't know. We do things thinking, oh, this worked for other devotees, so it should work for us. But Krishna thinks otherwise.
Yes, Prabhu. But that's why the principle is so important, Prabhu. Like I said, the application may be different. The principle is very, very, very important. That's what even Guru Maharaj always stresses. Time, place, and circumstance can change, but the principle shouldn't change. The principle should remain the same. And that's what we need to imbibe. Even the knowledge that Prabhu was asking about, that knowledge is all about the principles. If we can somehow, like the swan that can separate the milk from the water, that was an interesting discussion we had the other day. If we can do that, right, we are from that knowledge. The pastime is a pastime. It's beautiful. It's very engaging. But then what we need to really take away from that pastime is what we need to focus on. Because that is what is going to give us the fundamental principle. Once we know the fundamental principle, we know how gravity works. Obviously, we're not going to do stupid things, right?
Yeah.
We will stay away from wearing, walking on a watery surface, for instance. We know how the laws of friction work. So the principle has to be something that we need to take away. We need to glean from all of these pastimes, from all of the knowledge that we're gaining. That is the principle. That's a good starting point. Once we have that principle, then regardless of the time, place, and circumstance, it'll be challenging, but our intelligence should then be used to interpret this knowledge as a principle in a way that it actually brings us closer to Krishna. That's bhakti. That's when devotion, you're giving place for devotion to actually grow. So, sorry, I'm becoming pedantic here. I'm so sorry, but these questions are so wonderful and the discussion is so wonderful that it's just prompting me, and you can imagine how Parikshit Maharaj felt. We are feeling this.
When you're talking about all those great devotees and how they aligned themselves, one verse that came to my mind was Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Rupa Goswami says, Anyabhilashita shunyam gnana karmadi anavratam anukulasyena krishnanushilanam bhakti ruchyate. That is the one verse that came to my mind as the discussion was going on and on. So I'll leave it there, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Very true. Thank you so much. I know we're way over time, but thank you again for your wonderful association. So I'm grateful to you all for helping me through this discussion. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Thank you again.